episode of the Spencer Lane podcast today. We don't have a guest. It's just going to be myself, Emma, and Ez. Welcome, Ez.
It's a bit weird.
It's strange.
Without a guest. Normally the focus isn't on us.
I know.
And it's so easy to do those recordings.
It's much harder, isn't it? And for those watching on the video, you'll notice that we've got little Spencer with us today as well. So if you're only listening on the audio and there's some strange noises in the background, it's not us, honestly. It's Spencer.
Our little company mascot. Actually, funny story. That's what the business Spencer Lane is named after. Spencer is unfortunately no longer allowed to come into the office anymore.
I know, it's a shame, isn't it? It was nice when he could come in.
Yeah, I guess the purpose of this episode is one for our guests to get to know us a little bit better. And when Emma and I were talking, and we realised, funnily enough, without knowing it was our anniversary, but Spencer Lane's 3-year anniversary last week.
Yay!
We made it.
Yeah, exactly.
I was going to say with all my hair intact, but I started with no hair, so.
Yeah, good point. Happy 3rd anniversary to Spencer Lane, and happy 3rd anniversary to Ez as well, because I've only been part of Spencer Lane for the last 12 months. For the first 2 years, it was Ez, and is very much Ez's baby. So maybe that's a good place to start. Maybe give people a bit of an overview of, I guess, sort of your career to date, and then what led you to create Spencer Lane.
I love this. You've already jumped into
It's
interviewer mode.
so that I don't have to say anything. You can just do all the talking.
Just a brief snapshot of my career history. So I'm originally from the UK. I have always been in recruitment in one way, shape or form. I started in an agency, big agencies in Wimbledon, London.
Good old Wimbledon.
God, it's a completely different world over there.
It is very different, isn't it? And in terms of how recruitment operates and functions, like,
it's mad.
Very different. Yeah.
So I was a temp recruiter for a number of years. In Wimbledon, I moved over to Australia around 7 years ago.
Oh, okay, that's gone quick.
Yeah, I always say 5, but it's actually, I was doing the math, it's 7.
Yeah.
Which is mad.
Wow.
But just came here by chance, really, with no intention to actually move here or be here for more than a few weeks.
Really? I didn't know that. So you
Yeah.
essentially came on holiday in the beginning?
Yeah, pretty much.
Oh, cool.
I literally left my job in Wimbledon. It was raining on a Tuesday.
Surely not.
And I was driving in. I was 3 years into my recruitment role. And I remember thinking on the way into work that day, and I've been thinking about it for a few weeks, thinking there's more to life than this. I was doing crazy hours. I was actually working on Saturdays most days. I was running a temps desk, so I had around 70 to 80 contractors out every day. Driving in, raining, miserable, London. I do love London, but it was miserable. And thought, I'm going to quit today. And I got in, I remember my boss looking straight at me from across the room and emailed me saying, "You are not resigning."
Wow.
Yeah, so she picked up my mood and I ended up resigning.
Is that Joan Collins?
Yeah.
The famous Joan Collins.
Joan Collins. And I resigned that day. She left really nicely and said, "We'll keep your job open." And I said, "I don't think I'll be coming back." And so I went travelling around Europe for 3 months, ran out of cash, or was starting to run out of cash, and thought, can't stay in Europe for much longer, I'll go to Asia. So I went to Asia, stayed there for a couple of months, and again, was actually then running out of cash. It was Christmas time.
Yeah.
And I was sitting on the beach in Koh Samui, thinking I just don't want to go back to London. And so I jumped on, updated my CV, applied for a recruitment role in Melbourne, thinking, I'll just go there for a few months. And
why did you pick Melbourne? Like, did you know someone here, or?
An ex-partner from many moons ago. I posted something on Facebook saying, not done with travelling, thinking of what to do next. My ex-partner from years ago said, "Hey, I'm in Melbourne, got a spare room, why don't you come here, do a bit of temping and carry on travelling." So I reached out to him and he gave me a room, so I was like,
that's
oh,
nice.
well, I'll apply for
Yeah.
a job, and I literally landed, interviewed the next day, they offered me the role, and they were sponsoring. And so,
Wow.
yeah, it just all sort of fell into
Yeah,
place.
absolutely.
Sorry, it's a bit of a tangent. But yeah, no, I ended up doing that role for a while. I then joined a national agency, national recruitment agency, as a training and QA manager for them.
Yeah.
And then was promoted to their chief operating officer.
Can I just add here, you're missing the most important part of this particular part of the story.
This is where I met Emma. But yeah, I was there saying, well, for the last year, during my tenure there, which was around 3 years, and I'd always wanted to start my own business, but because of the visa situations, at the time I couldn't until I had my permanent residency. So when that came through, it was scary. It was bloody scary. My visa permanent residency came through a year before I thought it was, and so I hadn't actually planned financially to start a business. So it came through, and I sat on it for a few days thinking, I'm not really ready. I don't have enough money.
Yeah.
I was renting this apartment at the time. I think I had like $2,500 in the bank. But ever since I got my permanent residency, going into work was just becoming so hard. And I just, a week later, I thought, you know what, it's now or never. I'm going to have to do it. And necessity will push me really hard.
Yeah.
And so I resigned, gave the owner of that business a 3-month notice period, worked that out and started stenciling with $2,500 and
a computer and a phone.
literally a computer and a phone, and because of the fact that I hadn't planned for this and didn't have savings, there was all these pressures of, well, rent's got to be paid, cars got to run, bills have got to be paid, I've got to eat, I've then got to actually set up this business. And so it was bootstrapping.
Yeah.
And so I learned how to create a website.
Yeah.
And did that on my own.
It's really interesting, isn't it? Often, like looking back on stuff of, and something that we wanted to talk about later on in the episode, and maybe this is just a little caveat, but like sometimes adversity or things not being ideal can actually be the best environment.
100%.
Yeah.
I think when it's too comfortable, are you really pushing yourself? And I think, and if I look back in all the moments, not just that one, where it has been quite challenging at times, that's when you really, you have to push yourself. You've got no option. And I think when it's comfortable, naturally as humans, you go, okay, I'll take that option. It's the nice, it's the easiest one, and why would you put yourself in this really tough situation? But when you don't really have a choice, I think that's when you're actually able to really grow at a rapid rate, because you have no other option versus having another option and then you're still growing and you're probably challenging yourself, but not as much as when you absolutely have to, when there's necessity there. I think that's really good motivation.
Yeah, definitely. We've had one guest on recently, Mo Hamdino, who talked quite a lot about entrepreneurship, and we've actually got a couple of other guests in the pipeline that are going to be talking around that subject as well, because it's something that we are both really interested in and are ourselves, I guess, entrepreneurs with this business. Is that something that you kind of always had in mind? Did you know you always wanted to start your own business?
Yeah, I think from a young age, and it was my environment growing up. So my dad and mum were both immigrants to the UK. Dad was from a poor farming family in Pakistan. So they had a great deal of adversity growing up, and some of the stories that Dad used to share about his life growing up, which then drove him to be an entrepreneur.
Do you know why they moved to the UK?
So Dad was 16, knew he wanted more from life. I mean, Pakistan was quite a tough place to grow up. They had one room where his 5 brothers, mum and dad, my grandparents all lived in this one room.
Wow.
He knew he wanted more. he didn't really see an opportunity in Pakistan, and so when he was 16, I think it was just after the war, but the UK was offering passports to workers essentially. Because Dad was so poor, he couldn't actually afford to get to the UK. So he saw an opportunity. There was these cruise ships, or I think they were not cruise ships, but there were ships transporting things. But the shipping company targeted Pakistan as a good place to get workers, but the deal was you worked for the shipping company for 3 years for free.
3 years, wow.
For nothing. They had 2 weeks off a year where they could go back home.
Wow, that's hardcore, isn't it?
No pay, but they would give you room and board.
Yeah.
But at the end of the 3 years, the agreement was they'd drop you off in the UK.
That's madness, isn't it?
It's fucking madness. They drop him off to the UK and they get him his passport.
Wow.
And so he did that for 3 years. And so
that's very brave.
On your own.
Yeah.
Not speaking English at the time.
Wow.
So he came to the UK and started a job, got another job. He's working 2 jobs for a couple of years, saved up and scraped by to buy his first property, and then from there, I guess for him the rest was history. He amassed this little empire. He ended up at one stage having 60 houses around the UK.
Yeah.
Never mortgaged anything, which is incredible.
That's amazing. Good on him.
But he was always someone that saw opportunity and then ran for it, because I think for him, his alternative was go to Pakistan and be in this poverty-stricken country where there wasn't going to be a great deal of opportunity, and so he didn't really have a choice. It was like, well, I have to go forward. There's no real, there's a choice there.
Say that though, because a lot of people in that situation wouldn't even see that there was potentially another way.
Yeah.
So he did. There was a choice, but I guess for him it felt like an easier choice. Because one, was probably quite scary, I'd imagine, but the alternative was something that he just didn't want. But he still made the choice, I think, and a very brave one, to put himself out there and back himself in that way.
So he did that. He married Mum, she came over to the UK, they had 10 kids in total. A lot of kids. But I remember just growing up, and Dad was the hardest worker that I had ever met. All my friends' dads and parents, I didn't have the same level, I didn't see the same level of drive that Dad did. And it was a double-edged sword. I mean, he was doing these amazing things in his business and growing it, but he was never around, or when he was around, he was so stressed and just needed complete silence in the house because he was working non-stop. But what he did do, and at the time, it's funny, as a kid, at the time I thought I hated Dad growing up, because after school from the age of 11, he would pick us up from school and then we'd be on the properties with him, doing electrical work, doing plastering, ripping up floorboards. Probably why he had 10 kids 3 later. But at the time I was like, oh God, why can I go and not spend time with my friends? Literally not a single day. We would not have play dates with friends. It was, we would come home and we'd take it in shifts. It was like family business, but you'd have like shifts, so you'd be on 2 days with Dad after school, and you'd work from about 5 till around 10 p.m, and then you'd go home, go to bed, and get up for school. But so we were all sort of brought up with nothing comes for free, but you have to work for everything. We didn't do birthday gifts. There was nothing by way of that, and everything was done. Like if you wanted something, you saved up for it and you worked fucking hard to get it. And so I always, looking at Dad, and he was a nice role model to go, you know what, if someone with that level of adversity can claw themselves there, no English, they can get out of Pakistan, they can get a passport, they can build a business, then there's no reason someone who was born in the UK, in my opinion, can't actually do that for themselves and propel themselves forward. So I always wanted to, at the younger years, didn't really have the drive, I think, to do it, but it was always in the back of my head of, I want to run my own business.
Yeah, and I guess having always been in recruitment, was it always that it would be a recruitment business? or something around
I
recruitment?
think so.
Yeah.
When I started in recruitment, I think after a year and a half, it was then my career. And then it was always going to be recruitment or recruitment related.
Yeah. And I suppose it makes sense, doesn't it? Because you learn as much as you can, and having worked at, you know, a really large, are they global or just national? Global. And then a smaller kind of boutique firm in a much more senior position, you learn as much as you can about those businesses and see what they've done really well. I'm sure see some of the mistakes they've made, and you're kind of filing all that information away, aren't you, for kind of future reference of, well, if I was going to do this, how would I
think
do
that's
it?
a really good point. It's actually what you learn. Often I've found the biggest learnings that I've had have been from the mistakes that I've seen others make rather than what I've seen other people do really well.
Yeah.
I think the biggest learnings for me have been over the last few years before starting Spencer Lane is seeing what others do that isn't working and then not trying to avoid those mistakes, because I think otherwise you're doing that in your own business and you're making those mistakes, and as an entrepreneur starting off they can be so costly. So I think learning from the mistakes rather than going, oh, those people are doing that really well, I'll just mimic that. And it's like, well, no, I'd look at what aren't they doing, what have they tried that hasn't worked, because you want to avoid that.
Yeah, it's a really good point, isn't it? And I think true in a lot of things, but just that wider kind of approach to leadership as well, of just like looking around you and seeing what other people are doing and how other people have managed or led you in the past. And it's that same sort of thought process of, that worked really well, but oh my god, that didn't work at all. And often those are the memories that stay with you, particularly if you've been on the receiving end of a particular style and you're like, I don't ever want to behave that way or do that with someone else. And I think that in itself is kind of a mindset thing, isn't it? Just that, is it curiosity? Is it wanting to, I don't know, observe, continue to learn? And I think we're both quite similar in that. We're always kind of just looking and taking in information and then kind of distilling it through and thinking, would that work for us? Could we do that? How would we approach this?
I think so, having the, but I think it's, you mentioned the word curiosity, I think that's it. I think if, that's probably the common thread of all the entrepreneurs that I've ever met. They're very curious.
Yeah.
They don't just settle on what they're doing and that's the right way. It's always going, oh, what are they doing? What are they doing that's working? Cool, I'll learn about that. What's happening in the market here? I'll read up on that and see if we can sort of adapt what they're doing. I think that's quite a common thread.
Yeah, I think so. And something else that we were just talking about before as well is we're both quite big fans, and actually one of the things that led us to start this podcast, both quite big fans of the Stephen Bartlett Diary of a CEO podcast. If you don't listen to that already, then highly recommend. It's awesome. But one of the things that he often talks about is lots of people have really great ideas, but not that many people actually follow through on those ideas and make them happen. And I think it's really interesting to try and understand, just behaviourally, psychologically, I don't know what the correct term is, like what's the difference there? What is it that makes someone either follow through and do the idea, or not, and just always kind of have that idea, and sometimes, you know, those ideas may even be far better, but they never come to light, they never do anything about them, or there's that kind of inertia of wanting to perfect that idea, and that I think you see happen often. If someone's got an awesome idea, but they can just get so bogged down in, it's got to be perfect before I do it.
It's so funny. I've read or heard something in a podcast where someone said ideas are a dime a dozen. Amazing ideas are a dime a dozen. Everyone's got a great idea. But very few people, what is really rare is the people that will follow through with them and go, cool, okay, I've got this idea, and go away and do it. And I think I mean, because for those who are listening that don't know me, I run another business as well called Scope, and that's an advisory business. And in the last year or so, I've advised around 250 agency owners and leaders on a whole variety of subjects. But I think just doing that over the last year, you start to see commonalities amongst those people that are doing their sort of, well, going through the entrepreneurial journey. And there's a few common themes, but one of them is that ability to go in and go, cool, got this idea, I'm going to go ahead and do it. That sounds quite simple, and I think what often stops people is fear of failure.
Yeah.
It's self-belief that they can.
Yeah.
Because I think everyone has those moments of going,
Oh, totally.
can I do this?
Yeah.
Am I biting off more than I can chew?
Yeah.
But I think the difference between, because I think everyone has those thoughts, and all people that I've advised and guided over the years have the same thoughts.
But even just talking to your friends and stuff, like we all have those, don't we? All have those.
Yeah.
What on earth am I doing? Am I good enough? Can I do it?
Yeah.
What are people going to say? Like we all have those little voices in our heads.
Yeah. But it's being able to sort of squash those thoughts when they come up, the fear of failure, and actually trying to remove the fear by going, okay, if I fail, no one actually cares as much as I will. But also using that as a learning opportunity and going, okay, I'll actually learn something great here if this doesn't work, and I can perfect it and go again. And it's that resilience.
Yeah, and I think there's also a really, and this sounds really counterintuitive, but I think there's also a really interesting exercise around that, and I do this a lot, of what's the worst that can happen. And when you actually work through realistically what is the worst that can happen, it's never as bad as that little voice of, oh my god, this is the end of the world. Well, it's not the end of the world. It, if it doesn't work, then this would happen, and then that would happen, and okay, it's not great, but it's not the end of the world. And you've already kind of worked out, well, if that did happen, then I would do this. So it's no longer this horrible catastrophe. You've actually worked out, well, what is the worst that can happen? It's this, I know. And actually that thing isn't that scary. Yeah. And it sounds a bit counterintuitive, but I actually find that really helpful
really
to kind of go, it's actually not the end of the world. Very few things in the grand scheme of things that occupy our minds are actually that bad. We just talk them into feeling that way or seeming that way.
I wonder if it's just thinking out loud, I wonder if that is a historic thing as humans, because we're all hardwired with anxiety and we needed it when we were hunter-gatherers. And those decisions were either, a lot of the cases were life and death. We're not dealing with life and death.
And I think that's the thing, the hard wiring is still the same, but the circumstances are, in the vast majority of cases, not that serious. But the hard wiring is still, if I don't run, the lion is going to get me, or bear, or whatever it is. In recruitment, well, maybe it is that serious, I don't know. But on the, in the grand scheme of life, very few things. But I think as people, we tend to believe that the voices in our head are either right all the time, or that they're actually us. And I think a lot of the time, it sounds weird probably, but I don't think, like, the voice in my head a lot of the time, it's not me.
No.
I don't think that. And if I actually stop and weirdly, like, almost have a conversation with that voice, that voice isn't me. I don't think that, I don't believe that, I don't subscribe to that. And sometimes just actually, like, talking the voice down and being like, do you know what, no. I don't think that, I'm not willing to accept that, and having another thought, replacing that with another thought.
But I think that's such a good point, because there was a podcast I listened to a few years ago, and at the start when I heard it, it was that whole thing of you are not the voice in your head.
And you are not
And
your
actually
thoughts.
thinking about it after that podcast, so I'm thinking, holy shit, that's so true. All these little thoughts, and we take them often. What I was doing, I don't know about anyone else, but you take that
Take them
voice
on
for
face value, and you
go,
believe
okay,
it.
cool,
Yeah.
that's what I'm thinking, and it's not. It's just a thought in your head,
Yeah,
and it's really nice to sort of disassociate yourself from that.
totally.
So you can actually be objective and go, okay, cool, that's that thought.
And do I agree with that thought? Do I subscribe to that? Is it helping me in some way? And if the answer is no, then just disregard it and replace it with something else. And I think often, people either don't know to do that, or as I say, just kind of take that thought on face value.
And it is dangerous, isn't it? Because if you are taking that on face value, I wonder if that's why a lot of people don't actually go on this entrepreneurship journey. It's because the voice in their head goes, you can't do this. And if you're listening to the voice in your head, you can't do it, and you're going to listen to that voice. Therefore, you've got this great idea, which will never come to fruition because you're listening to the voice in your head going, you can't do this. What are you doing?
Totally, and I do think the other side of it, I suppose as well, it's a bit that sort of nature-nurture, that nature-nurture argument of those, is it something that is innate within you, that you think that way and that you would have always gravitated that way, or is it, in your example, a thing of upbringing, because essentially you're modelling what you saw. Like you saw your dad, and that was kind of always, it's interesting, isn't it? If you were you, but you hadn't been brought up in a household with an entrepreneur role model, would you still have gone on to be an entrepreneur?
It's an interesting one. I don't know. What made you, because you
I was
coming
hoping we
into
would get
space
round to
today.
this. I was just hoping it was going to be me.
I saw you interview. What made you? Because you quite easily could have got a director role with a large business, getting a very, very nice salary, maybe some stock options. It would have been quite cushy, and you wouldn't have had to go down this entrepreneurial route.
I think it's interesting, isn't it? There's probably two questions there. I'll probably start with the first one. It's a similar story actually. My dad was an entrepreneur as well. Differently, my dad was a hotelier. So I randomly was born in, well, not that randomly because it's where my parents were, but was born in Nairobi in Kenya, and actually lived in Africa until about 5. Firstly in Nairobi and then in the Gambia in West Africa. At the time my dad worked for British Caledonian, which back then was part of British Airways, and they as part of their portfolio had these large resort hotels around the world, and his role was to come in at the very end of the build and then open the hotel and get it up and running, and then essentially move on to the next one. And then after that we went to Malta, we lived in Malta for a bit, and this would have been the early 1980s, probably 82, 83. Their next hotel, which was supposedly the most luxurious hotel they'd ever built, was in Beirut. And they asked my dad to take his wife and young child to Beirut to open this hotel, and as I say, in the early 1980s. Dad didn't think that was a great idea, so left and wanted to start his own hotel, buy his own hotel and kind of start working for himself. And I remember bits of this, but obviously I've been told the story that he'd obviously saved up some money, but it wasn't kind of enough money to buy a really nice hotel. It was enough money to buy a hotel that had potential, but wasn't kind of at the top of it. Let's call it an up and comer. A fixer-upper. So he spent, from what I understand, a couple of months literally driving around the UK trying to find a hotel that he thought A, he could afford, and B, had enough potential to kind of do this. ended up finding one in Derbyshire in the Peak District in a little village called Grindleford, Maynard Arms it was called. And we moved in there, we lived there, and I remember actually, because you know the money was really tight, that we would actually be like painting the bedrooms to try and kind of get the hotel up to speed. And so yeah, I guess I saw him do that and be successful at that and kind of build a small portfolio of kind of, you know, little country hotels and pubs and restaurants, and I worked in some of them in school holidays and stuff. So it's probably a similar story, that I had that experience of always seeing my dad work for himself, so I kind of always had that feeling that I wanted to do that.
It's funny thinking about it. He should have had 10 kids. He could have put
I
that hotel up. He could
So
have put
much
that hotel up within a month. 10 kids
It
on
wasn't
painting
even, yeah,
rooms.
it's just me. Like little paintbrushes, like a 7-year-old or something. I'm not sure I was the best painter, but hey ho. Yeah, good point. So yeah, I guess saw that and always kind of had that in the back of my mind as well. But then I think I kind of probably, in hindsight, rushed it. I think I should have, because actually I left university and at that point started my own business, or was in partnership with someone else and had our own business. And in hindsight, it was too soon. There was so much that I needed to still learn, and I think would have really benefited from, it's going to sound bad, perhaps making some of those mistakes while I was in a larger organisation, and the consequences perhaps weren't so extreme. Having said that, I mean, I did it for like 5 years and learned a tremendous amount, and actually managed to sell it at the end, not for a huge amount of money, but you know, but we still see that part of it as being a success. And then kind of went on and did a few kind of other things, but always sort of wanted to come back to that idea of working for myself. Stumbled, as many people do, into recruitment in London, and actually didn't have the most positive experience, I think, for a couple of reasons. One, I think the field in which I was recruiting wasn't something that was personally really interesting to me. It was business process improvement, Lean and Six Sigma, and there were elements of that I found really interesting, but it wasn't something that I was super passionate about. And also I think the culture of the organisation that I worked for wasn't the best fit for me, or I wasn't the best fit for them, whichever way you want to look at it. But I guess, what was it, 2.5 years that kind of gave me a really good grounding. You know, started as a researcher and really kind of had to prove yourself to kind of be able to move up through the organisation a bit. This is a very long-winded answer to your question. And then moved to Australia 10.5 years ago. So I met my now husband in London. He'd been there for quite a long time, 10-11 years, and always wanted to come back to Melbourne. We met sort of at the end of that time, so he was always coming back. So I, separately to even meeting him, had spent quite a lot of time in Australia. My cousin lives in Byron Bay. I'd done a gap year here. I'd always had this thing in my head that I quite wanted to move to Australia, which I think for him was good, because it wasn't the pressure of I'm moving for you somewhere I've never been. It was like, actually I would be happy to do that regardless. So I think it kind of took a lot of the pressure off. So that was 10.5 years ago. And when we moved over, certainly didn't have a job before I came or anything like that. So it was kind of immediately before moving here, I had been working for myself, and I was like, well, I can't really replicate that business in a place that I don't know anyone, I've got no contacts, all of that kind of stuff. So thought, I'll give recruitment another go. Interviewed at one company and was really lucky to, at the time, again, just stumble, as it seemed, into the kind of creative digital marketing space. And finally I was like, this is something that's personally really interesting, and just loved kind of finding out about the projects that people were working on and the work that they were doing, and talking to really creative people I found really interesting. And yeah, kind of over that time worked for kind of a couple of different businesses. And I suppose what I learned, I'm sort of slowly getting to the answer for your second question. What I learned probably over the last sort of 3 years of that was the things that I thought were important to me, the things that I had used to define my own personal success, actually didn't mean that much to me. And I'd sort of set myself these little goals of, you know, I want to lead a team, I want to build a team, I want to build a successful, division's a bit strong, but, you know, part of a business, I want a certain title, I want to earn a certain amount of money. And I did those things, and they didn't really mean anything. And I realised that what did actually mean something was far more intangible, of that kind of being able to, sounds a bit cliche, but actually being able to help people and feel like I was actually doing something meaningful. And I'm not saying you can't do that and make money. I think we do that, but sometimes you make less money because sometimes you decide that the right thing to do is actually to say no to that particular client because you don't feel that their values align with yours, or when the candidate's expressing doubts about a role and their doubts are totally founded, to be like, yeah, I think you're right, maybe it's not the best thing for you, and to actually step back from that. And those things kind of became far more important, and I think I couldn't envisage, and rightly or wrongly, I don't know, at the time couldn't envisage another company giving me the flexibility that I wanted to be able to make those kinds of decisions. And I think ultimately, unless it's your business, you actually probably don't have the right to make some of those decisions at that level, within reason. You know, if someone's employing you essentially to hit targets and make money, have I really got the right to say no, I'm not going to work? And that, you know, that's okay if you've got plenty of work and you're really busy. So that probably kind of led me back to that sense of always wanting to work for myself, or in, you know, partnership with someone else who is of a similar mindset and values, I guess. And obviously, you said we've worked together before and had been friends, and obviously I was, whilst not working in Spencer Lane for the first 2 years, was kind of very much across it. The unofficial advisor to Spencer Lane. And I think, in a nice kind of almost serendipitous way, it's kind of come full circle.
Oh, I'm glad you joined
Here
us.
we are on my birthday.
3 years, it's meant that it's just flown by.
It does go quick, doesn't it?
I think my question to you, you mentioned that when you got into the creative space, that felt right to you. Why do you think it felt right?
Gosh, I don't know if I can answer that. It literally is just a feeling of just, it's interesting, I find the people interesting, I find the work interesting, I find the projects interesting. I, at sort of school and stuff, like I did PPE, so politics, philosophy and economics, so I did nothing that was remotely creative, but always had that kind of interest in, whilst I'm not sure I myself am a creative person, I find it very interesting. And so it was nice for me just to be able to kind of have that outlet, I guess, to kind of talk to creative people and understand the work that they do. So it's a bit of a vague answer, but I think that's what it is. It's just, I find it really interesting.
I think that's the thing, isn't it? If you, because similarly, I've been recruiting for 12 years. Marketing seems to be the one that really resonates with me. And it's hard because I haven't studied marketing, but really find it fascinating how, just even from a basic level, a campaign can affect a business and its profitability and sales, and really getting to the nuts and bolts of that. And I think setting up Spencer Lane in a marketing way and seeing which things have worked and how much of a huge impact they can have that to me is interesting. So those conversations when we're talking to marketers, talking to businesses about how it will affect them. Yeah, I find that really interesting.
Yeah, I think so, and I think again it's just that we were talking before about kind of curiosity. Just as you're talking to people, and obviously, you know, part of interviewing someone for a role is asking them questions, but a lot of the time I'm asking questions that I'm genuinely interested in the answer to, because I'm like, okay, how does that work? How does that fit together? Why did that particular thing work and that not? Why would you want to do it this way and not that way? And just kind of genuinely wanting to understand, because I find it interesting.
Yeah. Well, I would love to talk about it, and feel free not to talk about it if you didn't want to. But I think one of the things that consistently comes up with entrepreneurs, and funnily enough, this came up a few weeks ago when I wrote a post about something that had happened in my personal life, and it was on Facebook quite devastating. It had the opportunity to really knock me off. And I wrote a post about how I dealt with that situation. But I think I got a huge overwhelm of responses. Basically, for those that haven't read the post, it was around when my brother passed away. He was murdered a few years ago. I was 4 months into starting Spencer Lane, and I wrote about my sort of response to that and how I sort of reacted and responded to that. But what came off the back of that was so many entrepreneurs reached out to me, and business owners, consultants reaching out, sharing their stories and how they reacted. And I guess your situation pre-joining Spencer Lane was it resonated with me when I wrote that post, because actually Anna's dealt with her own adversity a few years ago before joining Spencer Lane, and I think similarly to me, your response to that could have been devastating to you. And how did you go through that whilst maintaining a sense of optimism?
I think that's a good word for it. I guess so, to fill in the gap, 2000 and gosh, I lose track of time. 2018, does that sound right? Not related actually. I found out just after I'd left, but I made the decision to leave the company I was previously working for, and at that time was kind of toying with the idea of going out on my own. Part of the reason I left was that I felt really, what I thought at the time was just really run down. Thought maybe I'm just a bit stressed, and physically didn't feel great. I had this cough that just wouldn't go away. It was winter. I'm like, you know, everyone gets a cough in winter. Didn't think that much of it. Stupidly didn't think enough of it, because in hindsight I actually had quite a lot of pain in my chest, but again the doctor just attributed it to the cough. He's like, if you're coughing all the time, you've aggregated, sorry I've just hit my microphone. Long story short, I actually had Hodgkin's lymphoma, which is a blood cancer. I had 13 tumours in my chest. Part of that was causing, well, the one that was causing the cough, the largest one was actually pressing onto my lungs, so I couldn't breathe properly, which is why I was coughing. And the pain was actually, one of them was growing into one of my ribs on the left-hand side of my chest, which when you say that, I was like, how the hell did I just push on and go, I've got a bit of pain in my chest.
I'm just going to carry on recruiting.
Yeah, I'm just going to carry on recruiting. Yeah, probably not the best decision. And very, very tired. So over kind of a period of probably 3 months after I'd left, of kind of going back to the doctor and saying, look, I've still got this cough. Long story short, that's what it was. And it's one of those things, like, you just never think something like that is going to happen to you. I mean, you see the figures around of, you know, the percentage of people, whatever it is now, 1 in 3, 1 in 4, I think, that get some form of cancer, which is a fairly shocking statistic. But it's that old thing of, you never think it's going to be you. And I think this sounds weird, and I know it sounds weird, but I think I was very lucky in terms of the cancer that I had. Very treatable, and once treated, quite unlikely to return. I'm still in that window, but the percentage odds of it coming back are very, very low, as opposed to some other cancers which at the time didn't even occur to me to even think that until the specialist said that. You know, I was just so focused on the thing I actually need to do now. But then it's not just now, it's the 3-5 years window that they kind of give you. But yeah, so in that sense it's a positive prognosis, but what they have to do to get to that point is fairly hardcore. 12 chemo sessions in 6 months, so one every 2 weeks for 6 months, which was hardcore, like it's a lot.
And I remember towards the end of those sessions you'd be knocked out for 2 weeks.
Gaga. And it was weird because you just do live your life in this kind of 2-week cycle of I'd have the treatment, which would take about 4 hours, 5 hours, 4 different drugs, and then I would literally be knocked out for like 3 days, 3.5, 4 days. Then I'd start to feel, and literally wouldn't get out of bed probably for that period of time. Probably certainly didn't leave the house for those few days. And then I'd start to feel a little bit better. And then in the second week, I was still pretty weak and I couldn't do very much, but I'd sort of have like these little hour bursts where I could do something. Like I could take myself, you know, and have a coffee or something, or you know, I could see a friend or something like that in just this little window. But it was really, it sounds really weird to say this, but I view it as a very positive experience because it really taught me a lot about, and try not to cry, I always knew that I was a strong person, but then something like that happens and you're like, I really am. And also just, you see all the shit that other people go through, and yeah, it was hard. Yeah, I felt like shit. Yeah, I literally barely left the house for 6 months, but is that the end of the world? No. Like, so many people go through it so much harder than I did. And to be able to just, I think the thing that probably helped the most was to just be able to focus on that and what I needed to do to get through it. My husband was amazing and helped so much and essentially looked after me because I couldn't do a lot for myself at the time. Obviously, you know, had friends around that were helping and even just, you know, just sending little messages and stuff. Not having to worry about the financial side of it. Thank the Lord, we'd previously put together some really good insurance policies, which when you do it, you hope you never have to use it, but in that circumstance I was so pleased that we'd done it because there wasn't this then financial burden, because obviously I wasn't working, I couldn't have. Not then thinking of shit, like how do we pay our mortgage, how do we do this? A lot of the treatment was covered, but some of it wasn't, and thousands of dollars that you had to kind of find along the way to pay for things here and there, and you know, if you'd had the added stress of that on top of everything else. And it sounds really weird to say that I feel lucky, but I did, and just this like weird feeling of, geez, I'm gonna cry again, this weird feeling of like gratitude, which sounds so counterintuitive, but it's genuinely how I felt.
It is so powerful.
Yeah,
I think you've mentioned it a few times, and that's what I see of how you deal with adversity, and I think so important is actually looking and not thinking, woe is me, fuck, I can't believe this has happened to me, I'm so angry. It's more the other side and going, what am I grateful for? What am I learning from it? And what am I thankful for? Because I think it's so easy in that scenario to just go down this deep dark hole of why the fuck has this happened to me? I can't believe this happened to me. This has happened, I can't do this. It would be so easy to focus on that versus going, that sucks. And thank God I've got all these other amazing things that are happening to help me.
And it's funny because a couple of people said that to me. I had one friend say, I'm so angry, I can't believe this has happened to you. And I was like, why are you angry? Like, I don't get it. Like, I And I think they thought they didn't get my response either, but I couldn't understand the anger. I'm like, why would I be angry? Like, it's complete random. There's nothing that I did that caused it. Like, it's just life. Shit happens. But what can you take from a situation? What can you learn about yourself? And how can you use that situation to move forward in a positive way, whatever it is? And often I think it's the hardest things that teach you the most. And I certainly feel that way.
It's so painful, isn't it? I think the acceptance in that scenario with your friend going, I'm so angry. Well, it's happened.
Yeah,
you kind of just have to
no
deal
point
with the
being
cards
angry.
that you've been dealt, and
No.
what can you do?
And anger's not a useful emotion. Certainly in that scenario.
Yeah.
Like, what use was anger to me? If I'd have sat there day after day being angry, what would that have done for me?
Literally
Absolutely nothing.
It's so funny.
As opposed to just feeling like weirdly grateful. Like, this could be so much worse. This is not the end of the world. That whole, what's the worst case scenario? My worst case scenario wasn't that bad. My worst case scenario was I've got 6 months of shit, and then on the other side, and I am, thankfully, still okay. Like, that's not that bad. Like, it can be a lot worse than that. So at the time I think it sounds a bit counterintuitive, but I do think sometimes that what is the worst case scenario, and then the feeling of feeling grateful almost comes automatically, because you're like, well, at least it's not that. Like, it might not be great, but it's not that.
I think that is such a powerful feeling and helps you get out of such shitty situations. Similarly to you, that was my feeling when my brother was murdered a few years ago. And going back to the UK, I just started Spencer Lane, was 4 months in, it was going really well. But I remember the feeling of looking around and seeing almost everyone in the family just angry and weren't able to actually process what had happened, accept what had happened, and focus on the positives. It sounds really awful when you think about it, your brother's just been murdered, what could possibly be the positives? But there was so many positives. He started a business, was quite successful, thankfully. He was able to leave his wife and the kids a bit of money that they could actually not have to worry immediately about that. I was thankfully not employed and was running my business, so I had that flexibility to just drop everything. We were making money, so I was able to help and feel like I could help the family with if they ever needed it. So I was just so thankful for all of these other parts. And actually part of me was thankful. I remember in the UK the day before the funeral, and I was thinking, I'm so thankful I'm not thinking like the rest of the family, because they were just so angry. And I was just sitting there going, I'm just so thankful I don't have that emotion, because it would be so hard.
And very destructive, I think. And quite hard to get out of once you get into that sort of cycle of feeling. And you can totally understand where it comes from in something like that. Like, it is a natural reaction, but I think it kind of goes back to that. You're not your thoughts and feelings, and they are not in control of you. You are in control of them. So if you find yourself in a situation where negative thoughts or feelings are taking over, like, you are in control of that. You can choose to think and feel differently. It's not always easy, but you can.
And check in with yourself.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think the very different situations, but I think what we have very much in common in those awful situations, but even in the day-to-day adversities as an entrepreneur, is the ability to go, okay, this is the situation. Might not love it, it sucks sometimes, it's awful, but okay, now we have to deal with the situation. It's not ruminate on the awful thing that's happened. It's okay, cool, this is the situation, I've accepted it. What can we do to help the situation? And I think we both have that in common.
Very much so, and I think the big thing for me in that is, whatever the thing is, do I have any control over what the thing is? And if the answer is no, then there's no point getting involved and stressing about it. If the answer is yes, great. What can I control? What can I do? And what can I do to affect the outcome of what's happening? But if I have no control over it, what's the point in getting caught up in being angry or stressed, or I can't affect the outcome. Just let it go. And I think it's that knowing what to be stressed about, or what's worth kind of getting involved in, and what's worth just saying, well, okay, it's happened, done, let's move on. We might need to get to our final question, because I feel like we've been prattling on for quite a long time. Some editing may be required. So those that have listened to the podcast before will know that we always end with the same question, and that is, what do you know now that you wish you knew then? Ezkan.
This is an easy one for me, because I was thinking about this a few weeks ago when I was doing some coaching with someone, and it is, I really wish someone had told me very early on that no one actually cares about you, your situation. Not in an awful way, but people will forget about your failures, your successes. No one actually cares. Everyone's so internal.
And no one's watching that closely either.
And so you're making decisions often. In my younger years, I was making decisions, always keeping in mind what no others going to think, and if I do this, they're going to think this of me. Literally dropping that in the last few years has been so freeing, and if you completely stuff up, no one cares. They'll forget about it very quickly because it's not them.
Yeah, exactly.
And so removing that and knowing that has been so freeing, because it then allows you to actually try things. It allows you to make mistakes and not beat yourself up. You're like, okay, it's just me. Everyone else is going to forget about this within a minute. It's
and often you learn more from your mistakes than things that have gone really well, because then you're like, oh, okay, well, why didn't it work? Why did it fail? What wasn't right? And then that information and that knowledge you kind of take forward into the next thing. But I think that's a really good one.
What do you wish you knew that you do now?
I prefer it when I get to ask everyone else's questions. So I've kind of got two answers, but they're sort of interwoven. So one is around having my own definitions of success and not either buying into or taking on board other people's, or I guess probably more broadly like society's definitions of success, but actually defining that for myself. I don't think I did that. I know I didn't do that. I as I said before with that example, was kind of always chasing things that I thought were important, because they to me were badges of success, but actually didn't really mean anything. And sort of tied into that, there's one around timeline as well, of cliche, but it's the journey, not the destination. I think I'm a very task focused person, so I'm always focused on the destination, and then that feels like, I achieved it, I did it, but actually the more important thing is the ongoing journey of what you're learning and how you're growing and all of that kind of stuff. So I think that ties into it, and then those sort of definitions of success can often be tied to a timeline. So I don't know whether it's being married by a certain age, or people expect you to have kids by a certain age, and God forbid you don't want to have them like me. And then you get some very weird questions from people. But I think there's a lot of things kind of woven into that, and perhaps more so for women sometimes around some of those things around, marriage and kids and your career and kind of choices that you make. So I think for me it's kind of making your own. I wish I knew that I could just make my own definitions of success and run my own race, I guess, and not necessarily care part of yours, but not actually care what other people think of that. There's quite a lot in there. That was a big answer.
You wish you knew a lot.
Exactly. So the short answer to that is I knew nothing. And now I know slightly more than nothing.
Oh, well, thank thanks everyone for listening. What a fun episode, well, for us
Yeah.
anyway.
And Spencer's woken up just in time for the end of the episode. Thanks for listening.
Thank you.